Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? In today's video, we're going to take a look at the Treasure Hunter event that's been running this weekend at Fallout 76, as well as the delay to the Fasnacht parade event, which is a bit unfortunate, and the community response surrounding that. So this is a bit of a response as well to a video Juicehead did last night, which is covering this topic. There are a couple of points in there that I wanted to add my thoughts on. It was a good video. I'll link it up in the top corner, so if you want to catch that, then well worth a look. It's a very good video. But let's jump in and take a look at this, shall we? So, as I say, last night, Juicehead uploaded a video covering the topics we're going to have a look at here. And there's a couple of areas I wanted to expand on that. That video is very, very solid, and he's very much managed to avoid any excess hyperbole or being overly negative, which is cool. I'm always pleased to see that, but it kind of takes a tone of much more constructive criticism, and it covers some really interesting points as well, things that I didn't know, which is quite cool as well. Saying that, though, there are a couple of things, as I say, that I think he's either overlooked or could be added to what he had to say, so I definitely want to touch on those here today. So first things first, the Treasure Hunter event. Obviously that's been running all weekend. I'm sure you guys have a basic idea of how that works. You run around the ash heap, look for mole miner treasure hunters, and take them down in return for legendary items and the pails they carry, which contain a variety of rewards, different tiers of rewards, including a varied set of plans. But there have been fairly mixed responses to this. There are a couple of points that people have been quite frustrated by. I know I have to agree with most of them. I have a few thoughts myself on that. So the primary areas for that being that the legendary rewards you get from the mole miner treasure hunters are not particularly useful. They tend towards being low level and basically are only good for scripting. The RNG on it is somewhat frustrating as well. Getting decent tier pails, particularly the ornate ones, the highest tier, is very, very difficult. They don't drop particularly quickly. They are of high cost if you want to craft them, and when you do get them, the selection of rewards is not particularly fantastic either, which, coupled with the RNG angle, causes a number of issues as well, and quite a bit of dissatisfaction, I think. So, regarding the legendaries, I think that's probably partially deliberate. They're capped at around about level 40, I believe, which is, I think, more to do with where the event is set than anything else. It's currently happening in the ash heap. It's a reasonably low-level area, which I think is partly because with the launch of Wastelanders not being so long ago, we've got a lot more players who are relatively low-level, relatively new to the game. By putting it in a lower-level area like the ash heap, it allows greater access for people who are newer to the game, which is not a bad thing, really. It does then, of course, mean that the legendaries are less useful in a long-term sense. Once you get past level 50, you'll have outgrown them and they'll stop being useful. However, I think the idea there was that these are secondary considerations. The event's focused on getting the plans from the pails and that sort of thing. The legendaries are more of a nice-to-have extra on the side of that. They're more of an afterthought. So I don't think that's meant to be the key point of the event. It's not supposed to be a legendary farming event. So I assume Bethesda's intention all along, sort of reading between the lines a bit, is to have players take them to train stations and turn them in for script. That way they can get more useful and more viable in a long-term sense legendaries by doing that. I think that's the goal overall. So a more significant complaint, and one that I think Bethesda will definitely have to address for subsequent iterations of this event, has more to do with the drop rates and the RNG and the rewards that are available. As it currently stands, to get the best rewards requires a lot of grinding, and it stops being fun way before you get those rewards. Especially when you factor in that the majority of the rewards you're going to get are either throwaway alcohol items or mounted head plans, which are not particularly great, to be honest, in my opinion, at the very least. I don't think they're particularly interesting things to get. I think we might have slightly shot ourselves in our collective feet on this one, because Bethesda obviously are looking at our point of view from theirs. So their perspective, I suppose, is a bit different. So while they're looking at what we're doing, but they're not in and amongst it in the way that we are. A lot of camps at the moment, you will see, have a huge amount of mounted heads, and it's partly a response to the fact that they've become a lot more available recently, particularly back around Christmas and the early part of this year. And from Bethesda's perspective, that is going to look like we're enjoying these things and wanting to use them and wanting more of them. So they're putting them in. But if that's not the response, which is certainly my feeling, I don't like them very much at all. I think they're a really underwhelming reward. As I say, if they're responding to the fact that a lot of people are using them, we're kind of handicapping ourselves, because the feedback they're getting is not necessarily the same as what we're feeling, or the way people are behaving is not necessarily consistent with what they're feeling, which is does affect the communication between the development team and the choices they make and the players. So that's something to think about. I think that's a bit of an issue. When it comes to rewards like this, I think it's important to make sure Bethesda are getting plenty of feedback on what we like and what we don't. People have commented, and Juicehead as well has commented, that the cost of buying pails to craft them and therefore avoid having to run around the ash heap for hours and then hunting down the mole miners is really quite high and relatively unattainable with the RNG rates and the drop rates of the high-level plans, the best stuff we can get out of it for most players. So I think the idea behind that is partly to encourage people to actually go out and engage with the gameplay side rather than just buying a ton of pails, crafting them and getting the plans that way, which I kind of understand, but with the drop rates as low as they are, it pushes it to the point where it's just kind of frustrating. I think Bethesda's idea is to reward the people who engage the most, and in a sense I'm fine with that. Having some of the plans be rarer and require a certain amount of work to get is fine, that's not really a problem. But I think they've taken it a bit too far, and the drop rates sort of need bringing back more into line with what a greater proportion of the player base are able to achieve. Obviously, maybe having one or two rewards in there that are perhaps smaller but cool, and keeping that very, very rare so that it is limited to those people who engage with it the most is fine. But too many of the rewards are too far in that direction, in my opinion, and I think it's something Bethesda need to engage with. So speaking of engaging with it, Bethesda have so far done something of a short-term quick fix. Not really a fix per se to this, in that they have extended the event through till Wednesday, which will allow greater opportunities for everybody to earn the rewards, but it doesn't really offset the balance issues. Saying that, this is intended to be a short-term event that will come back on a relatively regular basis. So hopefully Bethesda will take our feedback on board. As I say, we need to make sure we're giving them the clear feedback, especially if we want the responses from Bethesda to be in line with what we're looking at. So hopefully in future they will engage with that and adjust the drop rates, hopefully add a few more interesting new rewards as well, because at the moment there are, I believe, 8 new plans that are very hard to get. And some are good, some are vaguely interesting but not that great and not really worth it, and some are just not particularly interesting at all. So hopefully they'll be able to improve the quality of the rewards and make them a bit more obtainable. And as I say, hopefully that's something that will appear going forward. This is, after all, only either the first or the second time this event has run, depending on how you want to look at it. It uses the same basic principle as the Holiday Scorched event did over Christmas, so one could argue it's the second time they've run the event. But hopefully increased feedback and time to iterate on the current version of the event, the current way it works, will allow Bethesda to find a balance that works better for the community. That will be the hope anyway, and I'm sure they will attempt to do so in future. So with Fasnacht, as I'm sure you guys have heard by now, the event has been delayed as of yesterday. They managed to start it a little bit early, which is strange, and then almost immediately disabled it afterwards, as there's a quite significant bug with it that is preventing the event from running properly. That being that in order to start the main part of the parade, you have to do a sort of free objective to set that up, which involves collecting intestines from critters, amongst other things. The problem that is occurring at the moment is that the critters are not reliably spawning, which means you can't get the intestines from them and therefore can't start the main event, which is the bit that, after all, everybody's interested in. So, for the moment, Bethesda have taken that down until they can get a fix. They're delaying it and will, at some point, bring it back when they've actually got this issue fixed. Juicehead made quite a good and very interesting observation that it suggested that possibly this is down to a memory issue with the servers. The implications of that are quite interesting. So, the idea being that when the servers are up for a long time, much like if you've got a computer running all day, by the end of the day, programs you're running are not going to be all that efficient. Things are going to struggle. There's going to be memory issues. You know, if you run a PC from, I know, for example, what I do sometimes, boot my computer up first thing in the morning, come tea time, the programs I'm trying to use are not running that efficiently if I haven't switched the thing off and started it again. The same thing basically applies with the server and server memory, which also would explain why we see issues like conversations with NPCs not working as well as they should do. It's a bug I've run into a few times recently. It's just because the server's memory hasn't been cleaned out properly, therefore it's encountering issues, or at least so Juicehead has suggested. It's an interesting thought, one I hadn't really wrapped my head around, which is quite cool. As regards Fasnacht, what Juicehead was trying to say was that this will result in perhaps smaller level elements of the game being cut out of rotation, I suppose, that are not functioning. For example, the spawning of critters in game, because obviously they take up a significant amount of memory to spawn them in, control what they're doing, that sort of thing. So little things like that might be removed or not activated later on in a server's uptime in order just to smooth things out for the bigger stuff, for example NPC, stuff like that. Obviously when you get to Fasnacht Parade, that then becomes a serious problem because the event relies on this. So Bethesda, if this assessment is correct, Bethesda then need to address this and try and find a balance that will allow the event to run and keep the servers running smoothly. So on the surface of it, the solution to this problem would be to set things up in a way that allows servers to close down and new ones to open up on a more regular basis. But elements of this problem have been around for a while, and if it was as simple as doing that, then Bethesda would have presumably done it already. It doesn't make a lot of sense for simple fixes not to be implemented, because obviously the problems we have obviously have a big negative impact on the game, they don't help its reputation, and they upset the player base quite a lot. Bethesda definitely don't want that, they don't need that. So if there was a simple fix, why on earth would they not just do that? There's no logical reason for them not to do that. So the only conclusion that I can draw from that is that if they haven't implemented such a simple fix, then maybe it's not as easy to do as it seems. And this was one of the criticisms I did have with Juicehead's video. There are a couple of points he implied that fixes appear to be relatively obvious and simple, but that just doesn't add up to me, because if they were, they'd be fixed already. One of the big questions that is coming up a lot at the moment is how exactly did these issues manage to get onto the live game if they've been running the PTS and testing these things out, which from what I understand they have been. So my conclusion to that, and it's kind of extrapolating from what Juicehead did say as well, was that, in short, these memory issues, if that is what this problem is, would not be as prevalent on smaller scale servers like the private test server. There'll be less players moving through in any given period of time. So if you take a server being up for a day, a public server will have just shy of 24 people on it at a time, but one drops out, another one comes in, another one drops out. And obviously each time somebody loads in, everything that pertains to that character has to be brought in. And then as they come out, most of it gets taken out. But obviously, as I'm sure you know from running PCs and using PCs yourselves, just because you close down the programs you were using earlier doesn't necessarily mean they're no longer affecting performance later on. So the same thing will apply to the game. This will be much less prevalent on something like the test servers and obviously Bethesda's own internal setup, because there are far fewer people using it. So replicating these events, which I suspect is part of the problem Bethesda are having when it comes to fixing it, will be much more difficult for them. Even something like keeping a world up on their own end internally and just having staff constantly using it to try and create this issue is probably not going to be as effective, because how many staff can they really have playing at a time? How easily can they cycle people through? And what's the cost on them working on other areas of the game, other jobs that they should be doing, when it's just focused on a couple of issues? So testing it and getting it to work is kind of a practical problem for them, which I suspect is a significant part of why it hasn't been fixed very quickly. They're trying to essentially work a lot more blindly to fix something, which makes the repair much harder. So one of the criticisms Juicehead did have of Bethesda, to a degree anyway, was that their response so far to the bringing down of Fasnacht has been a little limited. They basically said it's coming down, it's going to be delayed until they get a fix out, and then they'll reschedule it. Which is, to be fair, quite vague. But the reason for this is likely just that they haven't got an estimated time on that yet. How long this will take to fix, if they don't know, putting out an arbitrary "it'll be back then" figure that they then might miss subsequently because it takes longer to fix than they anticipated is only going to upset the community further. So guesswork is not helpful in this situation, which I think is why Bethesda's response is a little shorter on this. I assume we'll hear more as soon as they've got something to share, but how long that might be, I don't suppose Bethesda know until they actually start grappling with the problem, or perhaps even making some significant headway on the problem. So it makes it rather difficult for them to share it with us, which is unfortunate to be in the position of the community member and the players, in the sense that we're wondering what the heck's going on, but until they have made some significant progress, they simply haven't got anything to share with us, and it will not be helpful to either the PR situation or to our situation either, to give us some information that may not end up being accurate. So I think that's a side of it that is important to consider, and something I think you said maybe didn't cover in his video. So that was a point I wanted to add. So in terms of sort of the community response to this, obviously people are not particularly happy with the way that the Treasure Hunter event has actually worked out, and how that has affected them, how difficult the rewards are to get. The delay to Fasnacht was never going to go over well, obviously. It's unfortunate. A lot of people were very excited for it, and coupled with the few other issues that are going on at the moment, particularly surrounding, say, player vending, which you said did touch on as well, the sentiment is not where we'd like it to be. People are feeling quite disappointed and upset with the state of the game, and there's a lot of bad feeling towards Bethesda over it at the moment, which is kind of inevitable with all this stuff going on. But to say, I've touched on a couple of points already that I think are important to consider and often get overlooked. I think there's the current climate, which I think probably factors in as well. So if you look at the situation now, I know Texas is starting to get back to work, starting to open up again post COVID-19 at the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Bethesda are. They may either have felt that they don't agree with the rate of opening that the state's going with and would rather keep their staff home and safe for a longer period of time, which is a hard position to argue with. It's a good attitude. It may also be that because Bethesda is spread out across multiple states and even several countries, in fact, since they have development studio in Canada as well, that they are moving on this issue as a company, so they're only moving at the pace of the slowest office, I suppose. There may be offices in other areas that are under full lockdown still, and they're not opening up other areas until the slowest moving area also opens up as well. But either way, whatever the reason for it, it means Bethesda's teams are scattered about, they're at home, not in the office. So addressing these issues is that much harder. Yes, they can obviously have video conferencing, and they are doing, but in terms of being able to walk over to the person at the next desk and just have an easy conversation with somebody else who's working on the same issue to sort of facilitate the repairs, the improvements, the bug fixes, that sort of thing, it's a lot harder to do when they're all working from home, and will significantly reduce the efficiency, which I think is rather unavoidable in this situation. I think it's something we have to factor in to the time it takes to fix things. And again, like I said before, Bethesda are not giving us dates and details on when these things are going to be fixed because they don't have one. And I think given the current situation, it's probably going to take longer than it might otherwise do so, just because they can't get together and actually talk about things, or can't do as easily. Obviously, the longer distance you have communication over, the more issues you have in that communication. So video conferencing, things like that, are not as good as being in the same room and talking to somebody and actually discussing an issue. It's not as smooth or flowing a conversation. It makes it a lot harder to get to the core of an issue or have a productive conversation, in short. So I think that's probably going to be part of the reason things are slowing down. So touching on the other issue that is quite prevalent at the moment, the player vending thing, with player vending being down. As Juice talked about this as well. Obviously, this has taken Bethesda a while to fix. It's something they've tried to fix on a couple of occasions in the past. Duplication glitches in particular have been an issue since day one of the game, pretty much. Every time Bethesda fix one issue, the dupers go out and they find another, which I think is kind of the key point. A lot of people's obvious suggestion is just ban them. But the problem is, even if you ban their accounts, they can quite simply use a new email, set up a new email, create a new account, and get going. They can also use VPNs, things like that, to hide their position. Hardware bans are something that Bethesda might look into, possibly, but how easy those are to implement, I haven't got a clue. And how easy they are to circumvent, I also don't know. So it may not be as practical to simply ban people as it might seem. If they're just going to come back under a different name, it doesn't solve the problem. But obviously the dupers are working overtime to make sure anything Bethesda do to remove a duplication glitch, they can get around, they can either undo the fix in some way, that sort of thing, so that they can carry on doing what they're doing. So Bethesda are not just trying to fix an issue in-game, they're actually being actively worked against, which doesn't make it any easier to fix. So I think that's something that we need to consider as well. It's a drag for all of us, but the finger of blame here really needs to be pointed primarily at the people who are doing this stuff, not at Bethesda. They were doing their best to solve the problem, but it is the bad actors that are the problem, not Bethesda. If they weren't doing it in the first place, it wouldn't matter that duplication glitches occur, because nobody's using them anyway. Not to say that it isn't a problem and Bethesda don't need to fix it or anything like that, but let's apportion blame where we should be apportioning it, or at least a significant part of it anyway. I think it's an important thing to remember, and understandably with the frustrations people are feeling, Bethesda are the obvious people to look at in some ways, but I think we need to avoid dragging ourselves down in a way. We generally do have a lot of fun with the game, so even when things are not working, we can end up making ourselves ultimately more miserable by focusing it on the wrong thing, I think. And I think it's healthy to try and avoid that and remember that. Okay, so I think I've rambled on for long enough on this. I think I've got most of what I wanted to say out. Got a big pile of notes here, but sometimes getting my thoughts out on subjects like this can still be a little bit challenging, even with a bit pre-planning. So I appreciate those of you who managed to stick with the video this far. I do admire your tenacity. If you haven't, do check out Juicehead's video. As I say, I linked on the card in the corner. It's a good video. It's got a lot of reasonable arguments in there and some very interesting information. But as I say, I wanted to put a couple of points out that I thought he'd overlooked. So I wanted to add my 2 cents to the discussion as well. As per usual, thank you very much for watching. If you would like to catch up with me on social media, all the links down in the description as well. And if you're enjoying the content, please do consider subscribing, liking, and maybe even becoming a channel member as well. Support is very, very much appreciated and very, very much helps. If you haven't already done so, do keep an eye out for the live streams as well, where despite all of this, we are having fun playing Fallout 76. And we're also about to start Deus Ex Human Revolution this evening, which will move us on slowly towards a bit of a B game in Cyberpunk 2077 later on in the year. So I do hope you'll join us for that. Should be good fun as well. If you haven't already heard, by the way, I also have a new merch store up and running, the link to which is down in the description. It's merch.streamelements.com/DarthZionGames, if that's something that sounds like it interests you. We've got a few t-shirts and hoodies on there at the moment, and hopefully a few other bits and pieces coming in the future as well. So if you'd like to check that out, as I say, link down in the description. Thank you very much for that. For now, I'll say thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you all very, very soon.